Today I'm going to be taking a quick look at EndeavourOS, which is an Arch Linux-based distribution that is based on the old Antergos Linux distribution. Antergos, of course, is now dead and gone, and out of the ashes of Antergos, there have sprung several new Linux distributions. The most talked about one is EndeavourOS, and it's been getting a lot of good press lately, but I haven't tried it out, so I downloaded the ISO the other day. I just installed it on one of my laptops, put it on physical hardware, probably run it on that laptop behind me for 2-3 months or whatever. Works just fine. It's Arch Linux. Essentially, Arch works fine on my equipment. I've never had a problem. Mainly the installer that we want to take a look at. So to record the install process, I'm also going to run through the installation in a VM and record that. So let's get started. So EndeavourOS, before we get into the installation, let's take a look at EndeavourOS.com, which is their website. EndeavourOS, an Arch-based distro with a friendly community. And reading the website, one of the things you notice right away is the folks over at Endeavour really want to push this friendly community aspect of Endeavour, because as many of you know, Arch Linux is famous for having a, shall I say, less than friendly community. That's a bit harsh. There's a lot of really nice people actually in the Arch Linux community, but there's also a bit of a elitist attitude sometimes on certain Arch Linux forums and IRC chat channels, because, you know, noobs are not really welcomed there. If you have noob kind of problems like installation problems, or you don't know how to do some basic stuff with Linux, they're often not very helpful. They tell you to go RTFM, read the effing manual. In other words, go read the wiki. EndeavourOS makes it a point that they're a friendly distribution, that all questions are welcomed, and that you will receive help. So that is very nice. It's definitely aimed for a, I won't say a new Linux user because it is Arch based, but it's aimed toward the new to Arch user, if that makes sense. So you already been running Ubuntu or Mint or Elementary or Fedora or SUSE or something for a few months. You want to try out Arch, but you're still not ready for that base Arch install. Give EndeavourOS a try. Much like Antergos before it, it offers 10 different desktop environments. It offers a base installation, and then it also offers i3, OpenBox, Mate, XFCE, Cinnamon, GNOME, Deepin, Budgie, and KDE Plasma. That's a lot of desktop environments and window managers to support. I think that was one of the problems with Antergos. They tried to do too much. It seemed like half of the desktop environments in the Antergos distro didn't install properly, probably because just there wasn't enough people, I guess, to work on that particular distribution. Every time I tried to install the OpenBox edition of Antergos, it never worked right. Some of the other more minimal desktop environments and window managers also had the same fate. So I'm going to go to the download tab here and grab the ISO from SourceForge. Actually, I've already got the ISO, so I don't have to do this. You guys will have to do it. The ISO is actually a pretty respectable size. 1.29 gigs was the size, so not terribly bloated. One of the good things about EndeavourOS is it uses the Calamares installer, the very popular Calamares installer that so many Linux distributions use. The problem with Antergos was it used their own installer called the Cinchi installer, and it was a net install, and it was buggy as hell. It was one of the reasons why so many people, including myself, were so critical of Antergos over the years. So I'm anxious to give this a shot. So let me fire up a virtual machine. I'm going to use VirtualBox today to run through the install and record it. All right, so I gave this VM 4 gigs of RAM. I gave it 2 cores of my 12-core processor here, so plenty of system resources, although I don't expect Endeavour really needs that much. But I wanted to give the VM plenty to work with here. Anyway, in the boot menu, I'm just going to go ahead and boot directly into whatever live environment it ships with. All right, and we've got, okay, it looks like, is it Plasma? Or is it Cinnamon? Or is it XFCE? What is this? This is XFCE, I'm assuming. I'm such a desktop environment noob. It took me a second to figure out what desktop environment I'm in. I don't run these full desktop environments, but it looks like they're using XFCE as the delivery system here for the live environment. So I'm going to switch to full screen mode here in VirtualBox so we get the full screen resolution. All right, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can run through the installer. So we got this little pop-up here that says preliminary information about the installation, read information online. I don't want to do that. Endeavor OS partition and install. Okay, I want to click that tab. Then create partitions. I'm not sure what this will do. Maybe open up gparted, I'm assuming. And yes, that is gparted that it opens up. Okay, well, let's create a partition. So I made a 15 gig virtual hard drive in this virtual machine. How do we want to divvy it up? Well, I'm probably just going to do one big partition. If you wanted to break it up into, separate home or other separate partitions, of course, that is your prerogative. In this VM, doing so many separate partitions is kind of wasted space. So I'm going to right click on the unallocated space here. I'm going to click new. By default, gparted wants to give this partition all the remaining space anyway, so I don't need to enter a number or anything. Create as primary partition. Yep, that is correct. File system, by default, Extend4 has been chosen. That's correct for me. I like Extend4 on all my Linux systems. And I think that's really all I need to do. We need to go ahead and create the partition table. One operation is currently pending. Click OK. All right, I need to go and click Apply All Operations. Are you sure you want to apply the pending operations? I'm going to click apply. Now, if you were doing this on a physical machine and you would make sure to double check, make sure you're actually formatting the right drive. Of course, in the VM, there's no harm, no foul because we're just dealing with virtual drives here. So applying pending operations, it looks like that completed very fast. I'm going to close that out. One last thing though, there are no flags here. We need to manage flags, and let's put the boot flag on. We don't have the boot flag on, it's not going to boot. So make sure you have boot listed under flags. Now we're done. So I'm going to close that out. Install Endeavor OS to disk. So that is interesting that they make you use gparted instead of having like a partition manager built into the installer. No big deal for me, but for a newer to Linux user, that's what I was talking about. This is probably good for a new to Arch user, somebody that's been around for a minute, but a brand new to Linux user, creating your partitions and formatting your drives with something like gparted, probably not new user friendly, right? So the Calamares installer, though, is very new user-friendly. You just click Next about 3 times and you're done. We got the welcome screen. American English is the language for me, so I don't have to do anything. Time zone, it's chosen the Eastern time zone in the US for me, but I live in the Central time zone. So I'm going to adjust that, then click Next. Keyboard, it's chosen English US. For the keyboard, that's correct. I'm just going to click Next. And then what do we want to do here? Do we want to install alongside another operating system, replace a partition? Yeah, I just want to do the erase disk option, which is install everything to the drive. We're not dual booting or anything like that. So this is what I would choose here. Then click Next. What is my name? DT. What is the name of this computer? It's already chosen DT-PC. I'm fine with that for being the name of the computer. We need to choose a strong and complicated password for the DT user. So, all right. Do I want to log in automatically without asking for a password? No, the reason I create a strong and complicated password is for privacy reasons. So I want to be asked for that password when I log in. Do we want to use the same password for the administrator account, the root account? Yes. So the admin account, the sudo account, and the DT account have the same password. That way I don't have to remember 2 different passwords, especially since they're such strong and complicated passwords. Click Next. This is our summary. Location, looks good. Keyboard, looks good. Partition scheme, looks good. Click Install. Install now. And away it goes. On most Linux distributions, this takes between 5 and 10 minutes for this portion of the installer to complete, so I'll pause the video while this runs. Okay, and the installation has completed. As always with the Calamares installer, you have to go in here and click Restart Now, then click Done. Alright, and I've rebooted the machine. It gets us to a login manager, actually quite quickly. It probably didn't take 10 seconds for this thing to boot up and get us to this login manager. So let's log in. All right, and here we are. Our desktop environment here. Again, this is the XFCE desktop environment. Wow, we have a ton of notifications going on. Well, I guess there's a million updates. Being a rolling release distro, and I think the ISO is a few weeks old, what I'm going to need to do probably is go ahead and update the machine. Otherwise, we're just going to be getting that notification constantly about the 96 updates that need to be run. So I'm going to go ahead and sudo pacman-syu, capital S, lowercase y, lowercase u, and give it our root password. Give it a second here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run these updates, and then I'll reboot the machine and check out Endeavour. So since this ISO was released, there was a new kernel, a new version of systemd, some new Python stuff, FFmpeg. The kernel version is the latest, 5.2.6. So very fresh kernel, but again, Arch is very bleeding edge. Pretty much as soon as somebody pushes out a package, it's in Arch. So, and not every rolling release is that fast. Arch tends to be a little ahead compared to many other rolling release distributions. Things like Gentoo, for example, typically aren't pushing things out quite as fast as what Arch often does. All right, and the update is completed, so I'm going to run a sudo reboot and reboot this VM and hope that that 100 package update didn't mess anything up. All right, it looks like it's booting just fine. So first impressions, I love the look and feel of this thing. I mentioned that it's Endeavour OS really is going to be pretty much pure Arch, and that's very much true other than the installer. Obviously it has a graphical installer, but they did customize this XFCE desktop quite a bit. By the way, in the website, let me go back to the website if I can. Go back to their home page. Yeah, they offer 10 desktop environments: Base, i3, OpenBox, Mate, XFCE, Cinnamon, GNOME, Deepin, Budgie, KDE. The ISO I grabbed, I guess, is just the default flagship edition of Endeavour. XFCE was the live environment, and there was no option in the installer to choose anything other than XFCE, which is fine. I don't mind checking out XFCE, especially if that is the default desktop environment for Endeavour. XFCE is a fine desktop environment. But I was wondering how to go about getting an OpenBox or Mate edition or i3 edition or whatnot. Obviously, you can just install it from Pacman, but then again, it's going to be vanilla OpenBox and Mate. Especially with something like OpenBox, I'd have to customize it myself, which for me, I have config files for OpenBox already that I've saved for many years. But for a new user, that wouldn't be a very good experience. I'm assuming they plan on offering a customized OpenBox and i3 edition. Their customized XFCE looks fantastic. I love the wallpaper. I love the coloring. The colors are very reminiscent of some of the Plasma themes, like the Breeze themes, you know, with these green and blue, teal colors. Love the color of the panel, the XFCE panel at the bottom. Also, this is not your standard XFCE menu. This, of course, is the Whisker menu. Looks really good. I love the icons, sets, and the GTK theme. Looks very similar to what you would expect of a really polished GTK-based distribution. You know, some of the more polished distributions like Elementary and Solus, you know, that put out really nice GTK-based desktops. So I'm really impressed. I was actually half expecting this to just be vanilla XFCE, basically just Arch with an easy install, but they've really did a good job customizing this desktop. Now, again, the ISO was only 1.29 gigs in size, so there wasn't a ton of stuff on the default image. So there's not a ton of applications pre-installed, but for me, I like that because I don't want like a 3 or 4 gig ISO that, you know, 90% of the packages that get installed, I'm going to have to remove and replace with the packages that I prefer anyway. So I kind of like these, you know, 1 to 1.5 gig size ISOs. That way I'm not spending so much time removing software I don't want and having to install the software I do want. But what is here is the default XFCE application finder, the XFCE archive manager. I'm assuming that's the default XFCE Archive Manager. It may be GNOME's Archive Manager. Yes, it is. It's GNOME's file roller. GNOME Archive Manager 3.32.1. We have the bulk rename tool. We have Clipman, which is our clipboard. If I launched it, I'm sure it would appear down here in the sys tray. This is our clipboard. I've never been one of those guys that used a clipboard, but those of you that prefer to use a clipboard, it's here for you. We have Calculator. Calculator is not a bad little calculator. Horrible name, Calculator, but typically it's the one I install on all my minimal distributions or my minimal installs, just because it doesn't have a ton of dependencies and it does work. Also, under accessories, we have Kalu. I'm not sure what that is. Kalu or Kalu? Is that our notification system? It's down here. Yeah. So it's this little Arch Linux icon that sits down here and tells us, I guess, about package updates. Update the system. I don't want to actually update the system. I probably shouldn't have even launched that. Can I close it? We have LightDM Greeter. We have a Mousepad, which is the standard text editor, plain text editor for the XFCE desktop environment, Mousepad 0.4.2. Nothing special about Mousepad. If you want something a little more powerful, I would suggest installing something like Genie. Finishing up the accessories category, we have our note-taking app. We have Orage Global Time, which is just clocks from around the world. We have a screenshot utility, task manager. So this would tell us a little bit about the system resources that are being used, which, given the fact that I gave this machine 2 cores of my 12-core Threadripper and 4 gigs of RAM, more than enough for XFCE. So yeah, we're using, actually it's using quite a bit of CPU at the moment. And it's using 9% of the RAM I gave it. That's pretty normal. You know, I may check that out in HTOP here in a minute. I prefer to keep the same tools every time that I do these. That way, you know, I'm not using a different system monitor every time I do one of these installation and first look videos, because if I keep the same tool, you know, it's an even playing field. So let's check out HTOP. And yeah, so hardly any CPU is being used. Yeah, I don't know what was going on with the GUI task manager there, but yeah, single-digit % CPU. And RAM usage, 341 megs. That is extremely low, but that's what I would expect from a good XFCE desktop environment. Also under accessories is everybody's favorite file manager, Thunar. And of course, I say that jokingly. A lot of people have a problem with Thunar for some reason. I actually don't mind Thunar. Thunar 1.8.8. Now, on my minimal Linux installations, you guys know I typically install PCMan FM. That's my preferred GUI file manager. But if I'm on a distribution and they happen to have Thunar installed, I'm okay with it. Some people think Thunar is a bad file manager. I'm not sure why. We have a development category. There's really nothing here. We have a graphics category. There's really nothing here, just your image viewer. We have the internet category. We have the Avahi server browser. We have Firefox as our default browser, and I'm sure this is probably the latest Firefox. So if I go to Help and About Firefox, Firefox 68.0.1, so that is the very latest Firefox. The latest versions of Firefox have been getting very good, much faster than some of the previous versions, and of course some of the services Firefox is offering now, like Firefox Send. Really, really good browser. I know not everybody loves Firefox. I know a lot of you guys like proprietary garbage like Chrome, but if the principles of the free and open source community and the movement matters to you, I urge you to reconsider Firefox. Transmission is our BitTorrent client. We have a multimedia category. Parole is the media player. I'm not a fan of Parole. That's the XFCE video player. I would probably just install VLC, to be honest. We have Pulse Audio Volume Control, XFBurn for burning disks. We have an Office category with nothing really in it, so no Office suite. So if you want LibreOffice, you can get it. It's in the repos, but they didn't ship the full LibreOffice suite on the ISO. Probably just to cut down on size. And then we have your standard settings menu and a system menu. So since this is such a customized XFCE desktop, it looks really good. I wonder if they included some extra wallpapers and some extra icon sets and things like that. So I'm going to right click on the desktop. I'm going to choose desktop settings. And we do have some backgrounds to choose from. It looks like your standard wallpaper pack. I've seen these wallpapers many times before, a lot of the standard XFCE wallpapers, so nothing special really in this wallpaper pack, but you know, some pretty good nature photographs, so these aren't bad. I think because they went to the trouble of making the panel at the bottom this translucent blue color, I think it makes sense to go back to the default wallpaper for now. Icons, I mentioned icons. We can adjust the icon size. You can decide whether you want to show icons on the desktop or not. Typically, I don't have icons on my desktop. I think it's just clutter. If you want to actually navigate your file system, don't do it with icons on the desktop. Open up your file manager and go to it that way. And I've opened up the system settings here and went to the window manager settings, and there are quite a few themes to choose from. Arc Darker is the default theme, and I actually do like Arc Dark and Arc Darker, so I probably would stick with those. The other themes look like some of the standard XFCE themes. Most of them are not that great, so I probably just stick with the default Arc Dark. I probably would stick with the default panel, the default wallpaper, really the default icon set. All of this looks really good. I'm actually pleasantly surprised, again, being a Arch-based distro that just started out. I really expected this to just be 100% Arch with the Calamares installer for an easier install, but they've actually done some work on the desktop and it looks really clean. So all in all, my initial thoughts on Endeavor, having just run through the installation a couple of times, again, put it on one of my laptops. Probably going to stay there a couple of months. The XFCE edition, got it in this VM. I'll probably keep the VM kicking around a little bit too. Looks good. The installation, very straightforward, was fine, both the VM and on physical hardware, which is something Antergos oftentimes didn't get right. I struggled installing Antergos in VMs and on physical hardware. It failed more times than it succeeded, it seemed. The desktop looks good. Again, it's only XFCE. I was kind of interested, and I was actually thinking maybe they offered a customized i3 or a customized OpenBox. I would have checked those out had they offered it, but since I would have had to grab them from the repos, it would have just been vanilla i3 or vanilla OpenBox, and that wouldn't have been worth checking out because there's not much to see with those window managers unless you take a couple hours to configure them, and I wasn't going to do that on this video. But what I saw, Endeavor OS looks good. I'm going to keep following it. I'm going to keep checking it out as they mature as a project and keep releasing, and I hope it becomes one of those Arch-based Linux distributions that I can recommend to you guys on the channel. Really, we've got so many of these Arch Linux-based distributions, and you guys have heard me say this before, so many Arch-based distributions and so many Ubuntu-based distributions that some of them I don't think serve much of a purpose. I don't think they differentiate themselves that much from one another. In the Arch world, typically, I've been telling you guys, Manjaro stands out among the crowd, and Arco stands out among the crowd. From what I've seen with Endeavor, at least early on, who knows? But, of course, we need to see more from Endeavor. I mean, it just really got up and going. You know, they need to have a few releases before I start telling you guys to really, you know, become invested in Endeavor OS, because many times these distributions come and go very quickly. You know, sometimes they release 2 or 3 releases and then they die. But the great thing about free and open source software, as long as the community wants to keep these things up and running, none of these projects ever die, right? Antergos didn't die. It just continues under a new name, Endeavor OS. If for some reason Endeavor OS died one day, the beauty of free and open source software is one of you guys can take up the project, rename it, fork it, and keep it going. That's why I push so strongly for free and open source software, something you cannot do with proprietary closed-sourced garbage. Before I go, this show was made possible by Ansem, Chris, the other Chris, Dylan, George, Mitchell, Natek, Philip, Rob, Robert, Sam, and Willie. They are the producers of the show, my highest tier patrons over on Patreon. Without these guys, this show wouldn't be possible. Also want to thank all those fine ladies and gentlemen, all those names on the screen that you see there. Those guys are my supporters over on Patreon. Again, without these guys, none of this would be possible. A sincere thank you to each and every one of them, and a sincere thank you to each and every one of you guys that view the channel and subscribe. All right, guys. Peace.